With me, comrade Taiwo Azan Soweto is joining live from the UK, United Kingdom. And then today we shall be looking together at the student loan by the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu administration. I understand the loan is to aid students who might find it difficult to pay their tuition, but the view of the Education Rights Commission, that's ERC, is different. Uh, Comrade Azan Taiwo Soweto has a different view, and he has to say, in fact, specifically, the ERC described the students' loan as a scam. Comrade Taiwo Azan Soweto, happy Sunday to you. And can you quickly tell us why you describe such a noble intent as a scam?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for having me. To start with, the Student Loan Act, which was passed into law on June 12th, 2023, is a law that claims to do one thing, whereas when you look at the details of it, you realize that at the end of the day, what it's going to achieve is something completely, opposite to the intent. And that is why we specifically labeled it as a scam, because a scam clearly refers to something that is fraudulent, an act of deception. And we think that that is what the Student Loan Act is about. Just look at
How?
this scenario. The student loan claims that, the Act claims that it's a provision to help indigent students who will not be able to afford tuition to be able to retain their admission and they finish their education by collecting loans. But when you look at the provisions of the Student Loan Act, you are going to realize that very few people really who are indigent will be able to access this loan, especially going by the various conditionalities that this Loan Act itself prescribes. For instance, you must have parents who have earnings that is above 500,000 naira annually. That is, they must earn less than 42,000 naira or thereabout on a monthly basis. They must also, have guarantors who should be, other lawyers with 10 years post call experience, or, they must know some, civil servant who would be high up there, in the civil service cadreship. So when you look at all of these conditionalities, there are conditionalities that ordinarily people who are poor, who are indigent, will not even be able to afford, because if you are poor, it also means that you have less social connections. Poor people don't know judges. Poor people don't know big time lawyers. And poor people also are not likely going to have big time lawyers or people with big career wanting to put their career on the line by guaranteeing for them a loan that is not even sure that they can pay back. So, because you require a certain level of friendship and social connections to have somebody actually, go to a bank and say that they want to put, themselves on the line for you. Poor people don't have this kind of thing. These are the kind of conditions that the loan says that the people must have. But when you also go beyond beyond all of those conditionalities, when you look at the bulk of resources that the is supposed to be provided to finance the loan. And the 2024 budget, about 50 billion has been voted for the loan. In a new publication that the Education Right Campaign (ERC) just launched late last year, which we titled "Why President Tinubu Student Loan, is a Scam." We looked at this amount and we tried to calculate the number of indigent students in Nigerian public universities relative to the population of the universities. And we saw that at the end of the day, that 50 billion would only be able to cater for less than 20%, of the student population in all public tertiary institutions in Nigeria. But when you look at just public universities alone, that sum of 50 billion would only take care of less than 10%, of the indigent student population in the public universities. So that at the end of the day, you are going to have tens of thousands of indigent undergraduates who need special care, support to be able to go through school. Yet they will not be able to get the loan, because the loan is actually for a very, very tiny minority, even of the indigent student population. And what is even much more concerning is that on the basis of the proposition of this law from last year, different schools administrations have been increasing school fees astronomically in an attempt to cash on the loan scheme, because the loan is supposed to be paid directly into the university's account. So you have seen many universities increasing their school fees by more than 500%, by more than 600% over the last few months, because what they want to do is to increase their school fees to the extent that if any of their students benefit from the loan, they will be government will be paying them those amount of money. And in a scenario where only just a tiny percentage of the indigent student population, would actually benefit from the loan, what this situation will mean is that the majority of Nigerian students over the coming period would actually be paying hundreds of thousands of naira as school fees, that they will not have a student loan to support them. So you have seen the situation at the Olabisi Onabanjo University, over the past year, where school fees was increased to over 300 and 400,000 naira. So if 10% of the student population of all you gets a student loan today, it means 90% of the indigent student population would have to be looking for 400,000 naira. Otherwise, they drop out of school. So, so when we did all of our assessment and research, we didn't realize that at the end of the day, the whole intent of the Student Loan Act, which was to support indigent students to be able to go to school, to reduce the number of people who drop out and co, that intent is never going to be achieved at the end of the day. It's on the basis of student loan and the associated school fees increment. We are going to have huge numbers of students and dropping out. We are going to have huge numbers of applicants to universities not being able to pick up their admissions. So that at the end of the day, it is the debt public universities that this Student Loan Act is likely going to lead to. And that's why we think it's a scam. It needs to be rejected, it needs to be fought. And what we need to demand is that education should be properly funded by the government. And in our publication, which I've referred to copiously in this my comment, we also analyzed how government can get resources to actually fund education. On the basis of our research, we discovered that the government is actually lying when it says it does not have enough resources to fund education. We discovered, for instance, and that was before the Better Edu scandal broke, we discovered that Nigeria could actually save on an annual basis a sum of 1.7 trillion naira outside of the annual budget, an extra amount that can be plowed into funding public education. And we itemize where those savings can be gotten from. Can be gotten from blocking the leakages and wastages that you have in the government today. In the 2024 budget, the president and the vice president are planning to renovate their residences with billions of naira. They are planning to buy cars, for the office of the vice, of the first lady, with billions of naira. There are other areas that we looked at and we realized that 1.7 trillion can actually be saved. And the importance of this point is to the extent that if people can remember, in 2013, ASU signed an agreement with the federal government for the government to release a sum of 1.1 trillion, which will be divided into 200 billion over a 6-year period, which they called intervention fund, to be able to save public universities from collapsing. And that agreement was reached after the government sent a panel round public universities in Nigeria. They called it a need assessment. And they discovered that our public universities were so terrible, in so much terrible condition, that something drastic had to be done. So that agreement was signed, 1.1 trillion over a 6-year period, on the basis of 200 billion per year.
Right.
Since that was signed under Jonathan presidency, since that time and now, the government has failed to meet up with that agreement. But what we have discovered in our publication is that 1.7 trillion can be saved every year, not over a 6-year period, to plow into public university system. And you can imagine what that can do. But that exactly is to show that this student loan is completely unnecessary. Government has resources even just by blocking wastages to be able to begin to tackle the crisis that faces public education. So there's no basis, to place this burden of indebtedness on Nigerian students. There's no basis, to make students to go through this miserable future that the government is planning for them. And that is the point that we are making so far.
So a lot of people are wondering that if you feel there are aspects of this act or this policy that need amendments, why not just suggest them rather than just trying to fight it outright? For instance, if you say, okay, maybe the amount budgeted for the students to be able to access this facility or loan is small, you could just suggest that. Or maybe if it is the conditions that are too stringent or not achievable or workable, maybe why not suggest other areas for students to be able to access it? Many Nigerian students, as we speak right now, are they don't mind. Many just feel that it is government is on their side and wants to do well for them and are already looking for ways to access it. So, what would you rather recommend if you are not going to be asking it to shut down completely?
I mean, well, we've never at any point threw away the entirety of the student loan act. What we have always said is that, in fact, we recognize that students, actually undergraduate students, need support. But what we have always said is that instead of making it a loan, it should be a grant, to
Hmm.
support, the living expenses of Nigerian students, in public universities across the country. Because you all know what is happening today. If you go to Unilag, for instance, after paying school fees, students in Unilag needs nothing less than 400,000 sometimes to be able to, rent a space around that corker. And in other universities, it's also the same, 250,000, 150,000. That's aside what students need to actually, survive on a month by month basis. And when you understand the fact that for many working class parents today, even to survive, it's hard, then it's easily understood how it's possible, it is increasingly difficult, for working class parents, to be able, to give their wards adequate pocket money after they must have been able to pay, the annual school fee. So turning the student loan into a grant will go a long way, in supporting indigent undergraduate students, allowing them to be able to get accommodation and to be able to eat well, and survive, over the semester in order to be able to ensure that they come out, with good grades. So that is what we've been saying. But what we are opposed to is the
Hmm.
ideological underpinning of this student loan, which claims that the government does not have enough resources to fund education, or that claims that funding public education is not, the obligation of the government, but rather, education should be turned into a business, that different private element comes to invest in. We think that is completely wrong. We think that Nigeria has enough resources, to fund education and to give a decent life for all, and that is only possible if, for instance, we do away with corruption and we also end the system of capitalism and enthrone a socialist economic, system, which can ensure that the wealth of this country is democratically owned and managed. And that will release huge billions of naira, that are currently locked in the bank account of individuals, make it available, for the funding of public education. This we think is very possible. And that is why when we oppose the student loan, we also raise the need for government, to increase the funding. But interestingly, despite how much of assessment of the student loan and criticism of the student loan that we have done, you would even expect that a government that even wants to meet, students halfway would even make effort on its own, to look at what provisions of this act they could amend at least to make it a bit manageable and acceptable. Indeed, and it will be of interest to you that, sometimes in October last year, the House of Rep ad hoc committee on education actually called an education summit, or a conference in Abuja, which was attended by different groups, including unions in the education sector, to discuss the student loan. And at the end of that conference, the chairman of the committee, whose name I cannot recall right now, actually promised to go back, to the National Assembly leadership, to see how the student loan act could be reviewed. In fact, many of us have thought that by now, especially by the end of December last year, that that committee would have brought out, the details of what new amendment it is making. Only for us to hear the president announce sometimes in December that the Student Loan Act was going to be implemented in January of this year, regardless of what campaigners have been saying. So what that tells you, therefore, is that even this government is not prepared even to make basic amendments to be able to meet people halfway. And that for me is a clear indication of the mindset of the government. They don't care what you think. They want to push this thing through, because don't forget that this was also the same bravado with which the Tinubu government pushed through, the disastrous policy of fuel subsidy removal, on May 29 last year. Regardless of what people are saying, regardless of the criticism of trade unions of ordinary Nigerians, they pushed it through. But look at where we are today economically. Everybody is crying. It is also the same approach that I think I see them doing with regards to this law, regardless of what all of us are saying. Even though the House committee at a period gave the impression that they were going to do a review, they want to push these things through, regardless of what the consequence will be. And for some students and even parents who might think that maybe this can give them any relief, I'm going to say today that they are going to be in for a surprise, because at the end of the day, they are going to realize that this is a scam, especially when the disastrous consequence comes. If you look at everywhere across the world today, you realize that the student loan scheme is not a unique innovation. It's been in existence in many countries, even including advanced capitalist countries, across the world. And everywhere where it's been implemented, whether in the US or here in the UK, it always comes with disastrous consequence, of the beneficiaries finding themselves in lifelong indebtedness. In fact, statistics shows that the level of the student loan in the UK is so huge that people are required to spend an average of 40 years to repay it back after they must have left the university. So
Hmm.
imagine if somebody leaves, graduates from a Nigerian university at the age of 30, and he has to spend the next 40 years paying back a student loan, something which will mean that if it's not earning enough, it means that maybe nearly a huge percentage of his monthly income will go into that. When would they actually have time to settle down and plan their life? So it means that at the age of 70, that is when that person will finish paying their loan and they now be thinking of getting married or starting life altogether. Because we are talking about the consequence of this student loan in an advanced capitalist country where there's even some level, of job expectation of jobs. In the neo-colonial world that you have over there in Nigeria, people graduate 5, 7 years after, no jobs of any kind. Some only survive by teaching in ramshackle community public primary or private primary schools, collecting 12,000, 25,000 naira as salary. How would those ones really be able to survive? And interestingly, the Student Loan Act doesn't even have a moratorium on payment. It says that people will start paying 2 years after NYSC. It doesn't say they will start paying when they start earning up to a particular income. In other countries where this student loan is being implemented, there are moratorium on income. If you are earning below a certain income level, you are not expected to start paying yet. And when you start earning up to that level, you start paying. For instance, you lose your job, or your income drops. Your payment also drops, because also stops rather, because the idea is that a man must eat first before he pays a loan. But in Nigeria, they are not even thinking that you have to eat. They say that once you graduate from the university and after NYC, you have to start paying. So, which is why anybody who believes in it now are likely going to find themselves, regretting it.
Let me try to summarize Comrade Taiwo, and if you are just joining, here's what he has been saying. If I miss anything out, please just quickly contribute it. First, that the capital, I mean, the fund base of the loan itself is so low, it's too low to capture the net of students who need to access this facility. It is too low. Secondly, you said that the conditions are just too hard for students who need access to this facility, and they might not be able to access it. And lastly, if I remember very well, you said that to the condition, I mean, the terms for repayment are also not reasonable. So, but I want to quickly ask, Comrade Soweto, if you are saying all of this as a pro-student movement, what is the what do you understand by the body language of the student associations or union of students? I mean, on this regarding this students loan policy at this time.
I don't think the current leadership of the student movement understands the implication of the student loan.
Hmm.
The immediate past announced leadership last year, actually welcomed the student loan. They went to the office of the president and they uh, publicly embraced him and congratulated him for the student loan. The current leadership of NANS, of both factions, I think there are two factions now. Neither of them,
Hmm.
from the statement they have been issuing, demonstrate any appreciation of the disaster that the student loan means. In fact, most of them actually thinks that the student loan would assist, students from being able to uh, survive the current menace of school fees increment that is raging across the country. And this is also the same attitude that most of the student union leaders at the campus level also have. Because for those that we have interacted with, you find some of them displaying illusion in the idea that, oh, when the student loan comes, perhaps their students will have some relief, from the challenges they are facing with meeting up with paying school fees or with the cost of education. So that really has been what it has been happening, and it's not surprising. Also, it's only I think demonstrates the ideological throwback, weakness that you have in the student movement today. Because again, the student loan isn't even something new in Nigeria itself. In the 1970s, it was introduced and it went on for a period of years before it vanished. That is because many of the people even who collected the loan did not pay back. So the scheme collapsed. So for a nation that has that kind of history, you would expect that the student movement, would be aware of that kind of legacy of the student loan and fight seriously to ensure that Nigeria does not go in that direction. But they don't know this. So that the work we have been doing the years really is like trying to swim against a mighty tide, because many people don't get it. The student leaders don't get it, which is why we think that we just have to keep on doing what we are doing, intensify our campaign, try and reach out as much as possible. But it also could mean that it might take, a shot of the experience, for the movement to awaken to the reality of the disaster that is coming. Because sometimes a child needs to get burnt, before they realize that they ought not to play with fire. Although the best thing would have been, that no child gets burnt, but then sometimes where tradition is lacking, where a movement lacks memory, then sometimes such brutal experience can be inevitable in awakening people to what is coming. But what we continue to do in the educational campaign is to remind students, that this is not going to work, and that the current generation who are in power today, didn't have to pay a student loan, didn't have to sell houses before they went to school. The likes of President Tinubu and co, actually went, to school at the period when government was still heavily subsidizing public education. And the size of Nigeria's economy at that time is not even comparable to what it is now. Today you have a mammoth economy with record level revenue from crude oil sales, from different sectors of the economy, including the service sector that is quite growing. Nigeria's revenue from tax alone dwarfs, whatever government was making from agriculture, in the 60s and 70s. So we are talking about a huge economy, which has much more bigger resources today. So why can't that same government, that same country rather, be able to fund education when just in the 70s, with fewer resources, education was funded. So that is what we are trying to do, to make people to awaken to this reality, and we'll continue to do our own very best. I mean, for instance, by February of this year, we'll be having a national public symposium where we intend to invite all student leaders, activists, all those who are willing to, to also have this discussion. We will not rest until we get people to realize that we need to start fighting.
Well, it is good and too relieving to hear that there are certain actions on motion to keep the conversations ongoing so that people can continue to discuss how to amend or how to adjust these policies in order to make it accessible for students or make it easy for students or make education even accessible altogether. Thank you so much, Comrade Taiwo Azan Soweto. Let me allow you to continue what you're in the UK for, and we'll continue this
Thanks
conversation.
for you.
uh,
Yeah,
we'll, we'll definitely have time to assess it again, maybe after the convention or conference in February,
yeah,
when there must have been some kind of palpable outcomes
yeah.
up to then. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. You can share for others to watch and to listen to. Nigerian students, this is a conversation that is very relevant for you. It's about you, and so you may want to share this particular conversation, this broadcast, with your colleagues. Thank you so much once again, Comrade Taiwo Azansu.